Hi students, welcome to the first week's lecture material here. I'm going to use a combination of YouTube and media site videos. This week we're using YouTube. We're going to talk about prehistoric India. And so I'm going to talk about the geography of India, then I'm going to talk about the Stone Age India, and then I'm going to talk about the Neolithic Revolution. So this is going to fit into our syllabus, our course themes, this material in terms of studying the very early societies of Asia and studying how these societies are formed. And then, once we've looked at Southeast Asia, once we've looked at Japan, once we've looked at China, you'll be able to compare how different societies in different regions across Asia developed and formed into the civilizations that we're going to study. Now, when we look at prehistoric India, describing something as prehistoric, of course, means that we've thought about what it means to be historic. The study of history demands that human beings leave records of themselves that they themselves have constructed. So this is what distinguishes history from biology. We can study the remains, the leftovers of animal bones, of animal remains. We can study the remains of human bones and human remains. We can study these things in the same way. What sets the discipline of history apart is that in the end, ultimately, we're studying the way that human beings describe themselves using words. Ultimately, we're looking for written records. This is where history really begins. So this class period, I'm going to be looking at the history of human beings, history of India, outside or before we have any written records from India, or at least written records that we can understand. What we'll see that's really interesting is that there are still societies in ancient India that produce written texts, and we still haven't been able to decipher these foreign writing systems. And so these societies are historic societies, but from the perspective of us as historians, they remain prehistoric because we cannot hear human beings from these societies speaking in their own words. So that's kind of an overview of what it means to be historic. It means that we can read the words that have been constructed and left behind by these societies. Nevertheless, it's the study of history, the historical study of civilizations is not just about the study of words. We have artifacts that are constructed by a society. We have paintings, pottery, these remains of houses and cities, and these all go into the construction of a civilization and the historical study of a civilization. Until you have the written word, generally these are still prehistoric societies. These are the societies in India that we're going to be looking at today. Just three key terms today: the mountain range of the Himalayas, the microlith tools that we have from the Stone Age, and then the Zob settlement that we find as one of the earliest Neolithic settlements in India. So let's begin by looking at some of the geography of India. I've got to get my PowerPoint going here. And so we come to the geography of what's known as the Indian subcontinent. Now, India has always been isolated from the rest of Asia by the Himalayas. So here we have our first key term of the semester, our first key term of the course. It's a mountain range, it's the Himalayas. You can see them if you can see my mouse cursor, you can see the Himalaya mountain range here. This is what has made India, is part of why India today is known as a subcontinent of Asia, because it's divided from much of the rest of Asia by the Himalayas to the north, and then we're going to look at these bodies of rivers in a little bit. These are the highest mountain ranges of in the world, and kind of doing some research for this class, I really got addicted to watching videos of mountain climbers in the Himalayas, Mount Everest, some of the other great mountains of the Himalayas, and it's just, at least I find it just captivating to see these enormous mountains. Basically, when you see people who are so high up that you can start to see the sky as dark, the darkness of space, rather than the blue sky that we see from the ground. So these mountains are truly phenomenal, are truly enormous, and they divide India from the rest of Asia. Why, in this course, do we study India as separate from the study of China or the study of Tibet? It's because of these geographical barriers that distinguish or that provide the venue for these regions to develop distinct cultures. So India isn't a different culture from China because of the Himalayas dividing it. There are other reasons for that: religious reasons, philosophical reasons, political reasons. But the reason why these two cultures don't mesh, that we don't see them as unified as we might otherwise expect, is it's significantly due to these large obstacles. So you can see that we have the Indian subcontinent here. It's this, I guess you would call it a sort of rhombus. And then you have the Himalayan mountains, you have the plateau of Tibet, and then the deserts of Western China. And then over here, we're going to have modern day Pakistan, that we're going to consider part of India for the study of this course. Then you have Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, these Asian post-communist republics. So this is sort of Central Asia that you have here. And then if we keep going this way, we're going to get to the Middle East. Keep going this way, we're going to get to Southeast Asia and Vietnam. So the Himalayas are a great obstacle to a sort of immediate exchange between India and other Asian cultures. They also provide protection. They provide protection from the coldest weathers that sweep across the steppes, the flat areas of northern Asia. You've noticed that we get, or those of you that live in Portales will have noticed that we get snow in New Mexico. This is weather patterns that are very much influenced by what's going on in Canada. If you look at a geographical map of the Midwest or the Great Plains of the United States, there's not really an awful lot in between us and Canada that's going to stop cold weather coming down from Canada. The sun here is simply warmer. But the Himalayas provide a certain amount of protection for the Indians. They provide protection from the coldest weather in northern Asia, and they provide protection from invasion. So on one hand, the cultures and the peoples of China and India and other parts of Asia are not as intertwined as they might otherwise would be because of the Himalayas. But it's also meant that India has developed this unique culture because the Himalayas provide a certain amount of protection, provide protection from wars and political battles that are going on in other parts of Asia. So the Himalayas are a source of protection. They're a deterrent to conquerors in Asia who might otherwise have been tempted to invade India. Despite the fact that we talk about these mountains as isolating India from the rest of Asia, we have to remember that India is an enormous geographic region. We're talking about a region that's the size of 6 states of Texas, that's a third the size of the United States, and that's if we're including Alaska. This is a really enormous area that incorporates a great diversity of languages and populations and cultures, which we'll talk about a little bit more later in this lecture. So India is in a sense protected by the Himalayas. In a sense, it's isolated by the Himalayas. The Himalayas are this barrier to a completely free interchange between India and the rest of Asia. They set India apart from the rest of Asia. Nevertheless, the Himalayas have always been passable. It's never been the case at any point in history. Even before we had bottled oxygen and aeroplanes, it's always been the case that people from outside India were able to come into India. Now, were they able to come into India with an enormous army and conquer India? Maybe not. Were they able to come in just casually as merchants or as relatives? Probably not, but it's always been the case that those who wanted to enter India were able to. And typically, the passes through the Himalayas and through the mountains that bring you into India, we find those in the west. We find those along this sort of area here. And so this means that there's a disproportionate sense, a disproportionate influence, Western influence, as opposed to a Chinese influence or an East Indian influence or East Asian influence in the development of India. Geography has supported a history of India in which India, in some ways, is much more connected to the Middle East than it is to China. And geography shapes this. Now, what I always say to my classes is geography doesn't determine something. It's not the case that human beings, we study history, we study what human beings are able to do. Geography isn't always a universal barrier to human beings achieving great things, their cultures developing in certain ways, the choices that they take. But geography certainly shapes those choices, makes them easier or more difficult. Now we come to the rivers. Because India is protected from Arctic winds by the Himalayan mountains, it means that India is often extremely hot. The climate in India is often extremely hot. This in turn, of course, means that rivers and water are exceptionally important. We have two great rivers in India, the Indus River that you can see over here in the west of India. Indus, India. The Indus is what gives India its name, the people of the Indus River. And then over here we have the Ganges River, which is spelled like this. And this is the other great river valley in India. Below these rivers, we have what's called the Deccan Plateau. Flatter area of India. Some people have speculated that India was once a part of Africa and then broke away, or was once attached to East Africa and broke away and became a part of Asia. I'm a historian. I really can't comment on whether this is true or not. What I can tell you is that the Deccan Plateau is a drier and more barren region of India that is much more reliant on monsoons, periods of great rain, in order for agriculture and the cultivation of crops and animals to be successful. So we have the mountains, we have the very fertile river valleys, the Indus and the Ganges, we have the Deccan Plateau, and then further towards the south, we find, again, that we'll find the plateau continuing. These different geographical regions and the huge size of India has contributed to its diversity throughout history. We have all kinds of different languages and even different language families in India. The history of language in India is fascinating. It is far more diverse than a similar area of Europe or a similar area of the United States. Not only different languages, but 5 different language families here, both Indo-European languages that are probably related to a common ancestor with English and other European languages that we find in the Middle East and in Europe, and also Dravidian languages that seem to be unique to India. Each of these language families has its own dialects and its own tongues, and so it raises the question as to whether India is a construct or not. How can we really talk about India when we have this huge variety of peoples and languages and regions? And so I'll start the next video by talking about that a little bit.